And, you know, between your presentation and Steve's opening remarks, I do get a sense that there's a lot of complexity here. So hopefully, I've been referred to as a blockhead in my time, so hopefully we could reduce it down to more layman's discussions. So we've assembled a great panel here of experts on media planning and buying, mainly the buying and trading part. And they're going to give an overview on how they're starting to think about, or actually applying, I guess in Mary's case, blockchain in the transactional part of trading media. And what I'd like to do is just open up, because we don't have a lot of time. We want to leave some time for some audience questions. I think there's some good ones here. With a brief opening introduction from each participant describing what their role in their organization is, how they define blockchain, and how they see it benefiting the way they do what they do, primarily buying media. So if we could just start with Richard Hartell from Publicis Media.
Hello, everyone. So yeah, I'm Richard Hartell. I'm the Global President of Strategy and Transformation for Publicis Media. So why am I, how do I define blockchain? Well, I think it kind of goes back to the reason why I'm probably interested in being here and the whole blockchain thing in itself, because I kind of define blockchain as a trust machine. I think that why it's very interesting for our business right now is I think our business, not just media buying and planning, but actually marketing in general, is going through a bit of a trust crisis. And therefore anything that can help to rebuild trust between clients and agencies, between agencies and publishers, between marketeers and their consumers is something that's got to be taken seriously and should be looked at. So blockchain for me represents that opportunity to rebuild trust in an ecosystem where trust has been diminished.
Okay, Michael.
Great. Michael Kaushansky. I'm the Chief Data Officer for Havas and also President of Helia, which is our digital CRM agency here in North America. So with respect to blockchain, we're getting smart on blockchain, and the way I would describe it is that for us, or maybe for a media agency, it's really a workflow measurement and tracking tool that provides transparency. And if you think about why would blockchain be important to a media agency, it is in response to what we've heard from advertisers around this transparency crisis. The other thing I will say, maybe a little confrontational, is that ubiquitous application of blockchain across the board, I think, is premature, way, way early, and I'm not sure if there's a lot of feasibility, so we can discuss that. But outside of media buying, I think blockchain does have a lot of application on the data side and on the measurement side, and that's, if we want to go down that path, we can certainly do that.
Hi, I'm Mary Keane-Dawson, and I've been in the industry 11 years longer than MediaPost has existed, which is a bit of a shock. I'm ex-WPP, and I've also built and sold 2 companies, one to Dentsu and another to JCDecaux. So I've got quite a lot of experience, and I've worked with some of the biggest brands in the world. And last year I decided to launch my own agency called Truth. And the reason why was because I felt that it was time to bring transparency to the fore from a client perspective. I was sick of hearing about burning revenue. I wanted to talk about how we invested in our consumers and invested in our brands to bring digital back into a much more effective way of advertising. And last April, just a few weeks ago actually, seems like a year ago, but we launched the first ever programmatic verified by blockchain campaign for Global Advertiser, and we're currently running 6 pilots for that Global Advertiser all over the world. So very exciting times. And I agree with Richard and Michael that blockchain has a lot of applications to media from the perspective of verification, but it does have limitations as well. And I'm very happy to talk about those too.
Hi, I'm Jack Smith. I'm the Chief Product Officer at Group M, and I also run the Global Blockchain Working Group amongst all of the constituent agencies of Group M. even before we talk about specific kinds of applications of that blockchain may be good or not good for, I think about blockchain as a way to make data more resilient and potentially more reusable by not just humans, sitting at the end of a query, but also by other machines. And the fact that we have a lot of data and some very thorny problems that we've not yet had to solve before, including GDPR, that data resiliency becomes really important, and it becomes important throughout the chain, pardon the expression, throughout the process that we go through from the time that we identify a target audience to when we actually clear a transaction with a publisher. So, what we're trying to understand is, given that we're still very early, where are the best places to apply this kind of distributed ledger technology? And ultimately, it may or may not be blockchain specifically, but we believe that a digital distributed ledger technology, specifically to start for digital advertising, is something that can be quite powerful.
Well, that's great. A great intro. So I heard trust, transparency, truth, and resiliency. I really like resiliency. I predict that's going to be the word of the year from the ANA next year. But let me give you
I hope so.
Just let me give you a quick anecdote, because one of the things I'm struggling with is, as I've covered this, as Steve said, a long time before MediaPost was founded. When I started working for the publisher of MediaPost, when he was the publisher of Adweek, one of the first stories I ever covered was about trust, transparency, and fraud involving analog media, and it involved a major blue-chip ad agency named J. Walter Thompson. I got caught defrauding its customers of millions of dollars back in those days. It was a lot. And syndication credits that never ran, right? It was the Marie Louise scandal. That was like 1983. Some years later, I covered another major scandal involving another blue chip ad agency that got involved in charging its clients for for media credits that never ran, which was actually the American taxpayers. It was Ogilvy and Mather and the U.S. government's Drug Free America campaign. I'm not doing that to signal out WPP or Group M. I'm doing it to point out that this issue has always existed with analog media. It's not new to digital. What digital has created is more touch points, digital and data touch points. And I love resiliency as a concept, because I do think the innovation of blockchain, from listening to Rolf and all of your initial comments, is this idea that it's this resilient, indelible marker of the interchange and the smart contract potential. So let me ask you on that note, do you think this is just a programmatic play or a digital play, or is this something for transacting all media?
Well, I would suggest that there's definitely the potential for it to be across all media, but it depends what you're trying to do with it. And that's the point, right? The purpose here is, and by the way, all respect to my colleagues, but they've got massive companies that, and I've worked in some of them, in terms of, the legacy issues that surround, this industry reset that we're all kind of aware is happening. And blockchain is not the silver bullet for this, right? But the silver bullet for our industry doesn't exist. We have lacked reflection over our own behaviors and the behaviors of our people, and that's now what's coming home to roost. I think the fact that blockchain is getting so much publicity is interesting. It's interesting from my perspective, because I get invited to speak on panels like this. But the reality is that we have lost sight of what it is we do in terms of our relationship with clients, and that's the real issue. Blockchain can, if we're stealing from our clients, okay, if that's how clients feel about what we're doing for them, then there's a massive problem in that relationship between the client and ourselves, and we have to sort that out. The problem is that it's a bit like being unfaithful in a marriage, right? Now you've got to go and kind of renegotiate the contract. And that's where I think blockchain can be a tool to help, verify that you're not going on social media and chatting up some girl on Tinder, okay? Or some guy on, on Facebook. But It's not the answer. It's how we behave that has to be reviewed.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, first and foremost, before blockchain, I think agencies have to act ethically and they have to act above board, because if there's trust, the client will believe you, advertisers will believe you. But if there's lack of trust and you replace that or try to just replace that with a blockchain, that's not going to help, right? Because to be fair, if we bring this down kind of to a 1,000-foot level, a lot of advertisers today do have access to DSP logs, DMP logs, and those are confusing to them, but they have access to data. But now you say, okay, well, never mind. Let's say you don't really trust that. Here's blockchain. 99% of them don't even know what blockchain is. And then you tell them, hey, trust this, because this is now real, right? Or resilient, right? That's not going to work, right? So that's what I'm saying. We're really, really nascent, right? In the way that I think it's going to be adopted, and I think you're right on the fact that I think data probably is the first use case. Measurement might be the first use case. Media buying, I don't know if that's the first use case.
Well, we've just done it, so it is, the first use case.
All right, so there's so many issues here, so many rabbit holes we could go down. We can conflate a lot of issues, but let's stay focused on media buying, because that's what this panel is about. And, you know, I get it. You know, there's trust issues in this world, always have been, and blockchain is just a technology. It's just a protocol. It's just a way to enable data to flow from point A to point Z, that a deal was done and transacted. There is a fulfillment part of it, which is kind of interesting if you use the token or not. But the real issues here are trust. So what I'm trying to understand is, how does a blockchain protocol enable more trust between you and your clients? Because in the end, it's still your business practices, how you trade, how you go to market, how you do your post, your proof of performance. How does blockchain improve that?
Well, I think we start with our clients by saying to them, both on the technology side and on the business side, this is what it is. And we, as I'm sure everyone here in the room who obviously you're interested in blockchain, you have to talk to people about it. They're two very different kinds of conversations we have. So we have to explain to them kind of the fundamental technological tenets on the tech side, and then on the business side, here are applications for it, how you use it. And you know, we go from there to determine specifically which problem that we're going to solve. And for us, we've seen, and not to go away from the media buying use case, but we've seen some pretty compelling use cases that were outside of media buying that we chose to focus on first because our clients have told us to do that.
Like what?
Like GDPR.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of, when I think about this, I go, it's not going to solve the problem of trust. There is an opportunity to reset a little bit with blockchain, but it's not the solution or the panacea to solve the problem with trust. And also, I kind of go, agencies aren't stealing from clients, right? We did a whole thing for the ANA 2 years ago. We were audited by our clients. There's no stealing going on. But what there is going on is we've got this ridiculous lumerscape that sits between consumers and publishers, where there's a huge amount of value which is bled out of the system. I think blockchain, if it's got anything that it can do well, is it can remove a lot of that. If it's going to be a layer that just sits upon the existing ad tech world and programmatic world, it will fail completely, because it's not going to work if it's just sitting on a broken system. It has to be used to address the system. If it's got any potential, it has to address that system fundamentally.
Yeah, I would agree. So as an example, let's say if there's a lack of trust with an agency, then why would an advertiser entrust the agency to launch a blockchain for them on their behalf, right? It should be then the advertiser, or directly with ad tech or a third party, and the agency now has to just comply through the blockchain. So absolutely correct.
I think that's a very good point, because, you know, and that's why the vast majority of our client, you know, the clients that we're working with are clients. They're not agencies. And although, interestingly enough, in the last 2 weeks, we've started conversations with agencies on behalf of the client, because they want to have a rationalization of the programmatic pathway. And that is a really important part of what we're doing. I think that, you know, from the perspective of this lumerscape, I mean, it's just absolutely crazy, right? There is no value in 70% of the technologies that are on that slide. None whatsoever. And I'm sorry, you know, those have been invented to basically skim off the client's budgets, not to actually deliver any value to the actual campaign. So that's the reset with regard to programmatic. And I think what we're seeing in the out-of-home industry is really encouraging, with both JCDecaux and Clear Channel actually building programmatic delivery systems, which are, you know, programmatic, verified by blockchain. And I think this is very important. Blockchain is not a way of replacing the pipes of programmatic or anything else for that matter. It has capability around verifying the actual transactions through smart contracts, and the fact that it's tamper-proof. The immutability of it is what is actually really interesting, because you can't go back and, you know, reset the ledger after you've done the deal. All it's doing is basically that part of it. But in terms of how we buy programmatic and how we actually plan and deliver to, you know, eyeballs to the consumer, I see where blockchain data and how we are actually delivering our campaigns is going to make, hopefully, digital be re-energized from a creative perspective, because right now consumers are switching us off using ad blockers or just ignoring the ads completely, and I think the effectiveness of programmatic is really at question.
I think I kind of agree, but I also think there's probably a bigger potential for disruption in here, because the idea of blockchain is decentralization of markets, right? And what we've seen over the last 20 years of the internet is the opposite. It's been about centralization of markets and value, right? Basically pulled into 2 or 3 big companies, pulled in all the data, pulled in all the value. Then you've got a whole ecosystem that leeches off the edges of that. It's basically what's happened. So we have the potential to decentralize in some way. So that could mean that data moves to the edges, it moves to consumers, rather than being centralized. That is potentially hugely disruptive for everyone in the room. That's what's really interesting about this. Now, on the way, we will find different use cases and models, partly verification, partly new pipes, partly data management, and we'll see what use cases work. But ultimately, the fundamental disruption this represents is the thing to watch for.
No, I was just going to say that so just kind of not to be anonymous. I mean, we're saying that, you know, Facebook and Google and maybe Twitter and Snapchat all together manage 70-80% of all the digital media, right? And you're not going to necessarily develop a blockchain with Google. Like, they're not going to be opening up their ad servers and their pipes, and that's not going to happen. You're not going to do that with Facebook. And in terms of like, well, you know, for every dollar spent on Facebook, how much it goes to Facebook tech? They're not going to share that, and even if they do, that's not going to give you any leverage, right? So then we're talking about building blockchain workflow for the long tail 30% of digital media that's shrinking year on year. Again, is that really the best use case? That's my question, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's so many pathways to go with this panel. I kind of wanted to follow up on the last point about the working media, and now you're going in another direction. So if you don't mind, let me just go back to that one, because I think it's really important. Yeah, we're all indignant that 70% of the money goes into, but it's not valueless, but the question is how much value there is there. But let me ask you why blockchain's a solution for that. So here's my question for you. First of all, the ICOs, I think, are kind of like a side scam, because they're raising all this money from speculative investors to create an ancillary market, to trade a derivative that's going to end up being something that people in the media business are going to have to speculate on too.
Not if you don't use the token.
Well, let me get to my point. Okay. Why do we need to fund a new securities marketplace in order to fund media planning and buying? I think the smart ledger and the resilient data are important. But here's my other question, which is, I understand through current blockchain technology, you can maybe transact thousands of permutations per second. In a typical programmatic media buy, you have billions of permutations per second. Each one of those processes requires a miner to go out there or a node or a user or a peer to process this thing, right? So how are you going to fund all those permutations?
Well, I guess just to address that point specifically, you can set up, you can determine what the rules are for clearance and how it gets written to the ledger. And in a private chain, in a private chain with concentration of players, it's unclear how that dynamic's going to play out, right? Now, to get to you're absolutely right about the volume problem. You know, I think if you look from mid-2009 to December 2017, there were about 300 million blockchain transactions total, maybe. And that's the largest, you know, publicly distributed with you know, et cetera. But, you know, the way that we're going to have to deal with that in the short term is if you want to use it for that use case, you're going to have to summarize them in some way. And you have to make sure that the summarization of that data doesn't remove any of the inherent transparency that you're looking to get.
How many blockchains are there in the world? Do you know? There are over 3,000. So when you're talking about a blockchain, okay, that, you know, there isn't one, there are 3,000 at least. There's probably more being built as I'm speaking, okay? So that's a myth. Number two, when you're talking about impression level data and verifying each and every single impression that is taking place in a media campaign, I mean, we are not at that impression level data. What we're doing is basically verifying that the actual data, the schematic data that's been fed through to us from whether it's a DSP, an SSP, or a publisher is actually against the URL, and therefore it's written to the block. So I think the fact is that, you know, we can sit here and persuade ourselves that blockchain isn't for us and it doesn't really have any relevancy to media, and yet it's over there where our clients are, where they're doing supply chain stuff because the long tail's too long and it's not really that much. Well, I think kind of 30% of what's going to be the programmatic spend this year, somewhere around 70 billion. I think that's a little bit of money that might be interesting to look at. And also the costs associated with blockchain, quite frankly, are not that great when you're doing it if you're doing it in a private way rather than in a public open ledger. If you're going on the open distributed ledger and you're using mining and tokens, yes, you're going to incur huge costs. But if you're doing it in a manageable distributed ledger through professional services companies, which is how Truth does it, the costs are minimal. So I think, you know, that we've got to bust some myths here around what the blockchain does and doesn't do, because we could sit here and persuade ourselves in our echo chamber that we often like to sit in media land, that it's not for us. You know, it's not the programmatic pipes that are at fault. It's not the fault of blockchain. You know, blockchain is not going to be the silver bullet that's going to clear up the industry. It's how we behave and how our people behave, and what we're ethically doing in terms of planning and buying media that's going to change. And by the way, Google are looking at blockchain, and they are talking to people about how they're going to actually integrate it into their systems, as are Facebook.
Joe, I'm kind of with you. I forget what the questions are by the time it gets round. But I think Mary's point about there are many blockchains and they are developing incredibly quickly. So, you know, you don't need miners for every blockchain. That was the original blockchain that was built for Bitcoin, where there's a mining solution. Ethereum does not have a mining solution. There are different solutions out there that are much quicker because they're node to node rather than having to go through every single node in the chain. So there are ways, and, you know, I kind of think about the blockchain now as being, I don't think it's 3.0, possibly is, but it kind of feels so early that 3.0 is a stretch. It feels like a little transistor that we've got currently, and we're a long way away from that being a big thing. Having said that, it's not going to take 25 years to become a mature technology. It's more likely going to be 3 or 4 or 5 years to be a mature technology because of the rate of change. So I think these solutions for slow programmatic will kind of go away. But again, it's kind of, that's optimizing the current paradigm. What's really going to change as a consequence of this is the interesting thing to track.
Yeah, I mean, here's my point of view. I mean, in terms of blockchain or distributed ledgers, for years, right, what was available hasn't been made available, which is, let's say, from a demand-side platform that has all of the log-level data, from the data sets that are used for programmatic targeting. A lot of that data has been locked up, right? And maybe step one doesn't have to be a blockchain, but just maybe a ledger, period, is if that data is made available, and let's look at it, maybe they'll answer 80% of any sort of transparency issues we might have in terms of how much is the take rate from this DSP and how much are they paying the SSP and what is the whole supply chain, and for every dollar I put in programmatic, how much is going towards this vendor, that vendor. Once you map that out, then you can start to figure things out. So I think step one is data availability and data access, so it's very pragmatic and it makes sense, right? If we move from a closed system where nobody really sees any of that log level data and nobody really analyzes it, or bypass that into blockchain, I'm not sure what that's doing, right? I'm confused.
So when have you ever seen a programmatic campaign being bought in real time and the data being served all coherently to a dashboard?
We've seen it.
We do it.
Yeah, yeah, we've seen it.
Okay, so most clients, to your point, do not, don't see this happening, right? They don't have access to
Some
that.
of them do it in-house. I mean, Kellogg's does it. A bunch.
We do it on behalf of clients.
Which is where my point about blockchain comes in, okay? Because when you're using blockchain to verify that those transactions are actually taking place as they were supposed to in terms of the contract and the agreement that you have in place with those suppliers, that it's a verification tool. Okay, that's what it does. It's not, and what would be wrong with having a verification tool for and using blockchain to verify your programmatic media campaigns?
No, it'd be great.
Right. So that's what blockchain's for in the media, in the programmatic ecosystem. It's not about, it's not about having a ledger. Let's do another ledger over here. This blockchain thing is real. It's here. It's not 5 years away. And most of your clients and our clients are using blockchain already in-house in their own business dealings. And the systems integration partners that they have, whether they're Accenture, Deloitte, SAS, are bringing blockchain into their auditing and into their business processes. And so to my mind, if the media industry decides to ring-fence itself again, right, and we're just going to let the consultancies eat our lunch, because that's basically what's going to happen.
But Mary, you're making the assumption that we are, and I don't think that we are ring-fencing ourselves from this technology whatsoever. We're incredibly interested in it. We're investing in pilots in this space. We're connecting it to other parts of our clients' marketing ecosystems and other parts of their business. And so we're not at all separating ourselves from this technology.
And we're also trying to learn from the physical supply chain trials that are happening in our clients now, so we don't make some of the early mistakes that they've made. So it's pretty important for us to link our marketing people at the client into those projects. And in many cases, they weren't linked into those at all.
I mean, our goal as an agency, I think, is, or at least the right thing to do now with this whole trust thing, is to demystify what is blockchain, right? And if it is truly a verification tool of programmatic and offline media and so on and so forth, that's amazing. But if it's then sold as more than that, that's what we need to understand, right? So and same thing with advertisers. I think today they need to understand exactly for every dollar they spend in media, how much of it is working media, how much of it goes to tech data, yada, yada, yada. So if we can help them understand that and then verify that, we've done our job.
So we don't have a lot of time, and I want to get to audience questions, but I think this could be a whole panel itself, just how it applies to programmatic. But I want to make sure I heard correctly, if I heard between the lines, that the idea is right now it's basically smart contracts to do programmatic direct deals and private markets. It's not really going to solve the solution for those billions and billions of permutations of open RTB trading and fraud and things
I don't
like
believe
that.
at this stage it is, but I think to the points of the earlier speakers, it's evolving at such a rapid pace. I think that the scale is coming.
I think the use cases are there are many out there. There are use cases around blockchain in the space, which is around ad blocking and consumers having control about what ads they see and what ads they don't, and what privacy they give up and what privacy they don't. There's use cases around decentralizing DMPs and DSPs, so rather than one, you have 50 million, because they're at the home level, they're at the individual level, because you're giving data control back to people. There are use cases around verifications, around payment systems, there are use cases which go into the loyalty space. They're all connected, And that's actually the interesting part of this, is that because the blockchain can connect other parts of the marketing ecosystem to one another, a loyalty program around first-party data to how you think about targeting an acquisition, that's where it gets really interesting. Absolutely. Because the immutability of that data at an ID level or whatever can be really, really powerful across those different places. Now, the technology is not there to do that, but the opportunity is absolutely there.
So the use case for this panel, I remind you, is on media buying, but we have some audience questions. I think we should start getting into them because we don't have much time. And I do want to try and come back to that earlier point.
Yeah. Hey, hey, Steve Latham, Flash Talking. Great panel, guys. Thank you for the different points of view. And actually, Joe, your question was the first of my two, which are some of the use cases. And Richard, I thought it was a good job kind of laying out some of those. Because I think it's confusing when you talk about blockchain replacing the ad tech ecosystem, because as if it's one big monolithic thing, which it's not, right? It's a bunch of unique processes and apps, if you think of it that way. Do you guys, you talked about some of the use cases. Which of those do you feel like if you were to strip out pieces of the ad tech ecosystem, verification keeps coming up as a blockchain use case? Obviously, verifying billions of impressions being viewable or served to humans is economically, I think we're all having question marks. Is that really viable anytime soon? But are there specific things besides a smart I/O or verifying some user-level data and logging opt-outs or something like that that could really put some, some verification, trust in the data, but are there any specific apps in the ecosystem that you guys see being disrupted sooner than later? Like what would be the immediate applications of a blockchain process? And maybe talking about what you guys did for, I'm curious what it means to have launched campaigns on the blockchain. I'd love to, a little more detail on that as well.
Well, I mean, I can come and give you a deck if you want, but excuse me, I'm sorry. Sure. But I think that the interoperability of the ecosystem with regard to how blockchain works is actually, the next stage of the development of this. And to your point about the actual apps that are currently being built on using blockchain technology that will which actually impact on the programmatic system and in terms of the creative, programmatic from a creative perspective, they're now coming down the line. I think they're probably 2-3 years away from being actually, mainstream, but they are there and they are coming. And I think that that's one of the most interesting areas where we can actually kind of connect all of this data and it's verifiable rather than the situation at the moment where we've got a lot of confusion. However, I don't see us replacing double verify, in terms of what we're able to do. I think what we are able to say is that in near real time, you can see an audit trail of what is happening in terms of the programmatic contracts that you are engaged in, and in terms of the deals that you've got between your various suppliers. But and that probably cuts the auditor out of the mix in the immediate, short term.
One use case which we don't talk a lot about in the media buying world, but we think about because we produce a lot of content is rights management, content provenance. And if you look at content as a specific kind of asset, then the way that it connects into media buying is it shows up on a page, it gets delivered to a device. So metrics around those two things can be combined. So that's a pretty interesting use case that we typically don't talk about within the media world. We think about mostly clearance or billing reconciliation kind of use cases, but really it's starting on one side at the production of content, and then the other side is starting with client contracts, which for a global agency are quite complex, and they have variances by market, by region. Starting at those 2 points, I think, are pretty interesting ways to get to arrive at the center where data starts getting shared between those two.
Yeah, I'm Jeff Thaler from Group M in the Program Management and Operations lanes, so Jack can either choose to respond to this or recuse himself. I'm just curious, organizationally, I mean, the threats that you've spoken about in terms of consultancies coming in to eat our lunch, or the things that agencies have done to themselves to put them ourselves on the back foot. What are your thoughts on just how do you avoid those things within the agency organizations in terms of attracting talent or different types of talent, and communicating clearly within the agencies and having your specific perspective that's unified and therefore can grow because of that alignment?
I think if I understand the question, I think, and also to keep it on media buying, I think that there are many use cases within media buying, but the thing about media buying is it's not a siloed activity. It is connected to things like content development, because that's built into that process more and more in and of itself. I think, and then related to your question, I think about consultancies. The benefit of us versus consultancies is, well, of the holding groups and some of the holding groups, is that we execute. We have data, we have an interface with consumers that gives us a learning feedback to understand what works and what doesn't. Consultancies yet do not have that interface. They do not have the data assets that we have. So I would say, and it goes a little bit to your question as well, is verification is a means to an end. It's a good thing, it's a hygiene factor that we need in the industry. But actually attribution, which sits above that, is really, really critical. That's the main point. Does it work? Does it deliver value back to clients? Does it actually deliver value to consumers at the same time? Because there's got to be a value exchange between the two. So in the process of media buying, are we delivering value? And can we attribute that value to what we've done? And that's how we'll win against consultants, and how we connect media buying to other parts of the marketing solution and actually to other parts of their business, things like supply chain, is how we'll win against consultants. If we don't do that, we'll stay in our swim lane and we'll not go beyond that.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, so in terms of will blockchain remove any of the LumaScape, no, what I'm hearing is blockchain will verify the LumaScape, so it'll be yet another technology on top of the LumaScape, and we'll kind of connect it and verify it.
Go down to 80% of working media.
Yeah, right. But the second point is the reason consultancies are pushing blockchain is it's a revenue stream. But then in terms of activating the LumaScape, it is the agencies. Like, we can go in and activate the LumaScape, or we understand with these individual components, double verify, flash talk. We know with these ad tech players what value they add, and we can activate them and stitch them together and to provide a very effective or deliver a very effective campaign. So I think, yes, we can execute. I think the blockchain piece is interesting to be able to connect and verify how we're executing and provide maybe a ledger there. But even before we get there, my sense is that I want to be able to provide transparency in a very basic way, step one, and then if that's not satisfactory, or if there's a way to automate it and provide it in a more robust way, then blockchain or distributed ledgers or any of those technologies, I think, might be a useful tool.
I'm curious, I'd like to get your guys' take on what you think are the most disruptive business models to advertising that you've seen that are outside of your current business.
Other than Google and Facebook?
Yeah, no, new ones playing in, because I think Google and Facebook face the same challenge, which is all business models are predicated on essentially being silos, data silos, black box business models. What business models have you seen in the emerging blockchain ecosystem that you think are potentially large threats?
I would say Brave's basic attention token, which creates a direct intermediation between the users, the publishers, and the advertisers.
I think Brave is an interesting business. I think they are obviously biting off pretty big, because, right, it's a browser, and there's some pretty big browsers out there that they've got to compete against and get the scale in order to be able to, because they need scale, otherwise they won't be able to do this. And they need to get publishers on side to be able to win. So there's a couple of big challenges that they have. I think Mad Hives is interesting, but their technology is not there yet. But I do think it's an interesting model that they're thinking about, which is about the decentralization of data and around privacy. So I think that's an interesting model. There's a couple of others out there as well, Papyrus, who was interesting. But again, they're all sort of individual use cases that I think are like very small signifiers of what may be to come, but they're not going. Those companies, I doubt, are going to be the disruptors themselves.
It's a good point. I mean, if you think about the distribution or the control of data at the edge versus in centralized entities, whether it's a data provider or Google or Facebook, that presents the greatest the greatest potential for disruption, but also it's the hardest to implement. So how does that get implemented? Well, one easy way to do it would be inside an operating system or inside a device itself on the chipset. And if that happens, then that's potentially huge. I mean, you need to get distribution of that, and then you have to get consumers to actually use it.
I mean, you could imagine some of the technology, because it's at the device level, sitting in over-the-top devices in the home, and you can start to get into the TV ecosystem and how you distribute advertising in that space. I could see that being highly disruptive to the television space if that happens.
Do we have time? Or?
Yeah.
Any
yeah,
more
we do.
questions?
You have another question,
Oh,
or
yeah,
anybody
I
else
do.
does?
So I want to come back, banking off of Brave, which I'm a big fan of that concept, and talking about the duopoly and this idea of, I mean, what they've done effectively is they've assembled this census-level database of human identity, so they've given you trust and confidence that you can target people. You get results on the back end. But so why do you keep increasing your investments in that, and why don't you fund an alternative system? I mean, you at Group M, through the IDs, and I think Artemis, and you've all assembled massive identity databases. Why wouldn't you just bypass them and go to some kind of blockchain-enabled identity currency?
I'll answer the question around investment in, let's say, Facebook and Google. I think if you kind of compare those publishers and publishers/tech providers and data providers, one is they have quality content, they have scalable reach, they have really good measurement for a platform. They're more Google than Facebook is open in terms of how they process data, how they use data, how ads are consumed by consumers and consumer behavior, and how they treat that. So I think there is that level of trust. They have smart people working on their end. They're able to walk you through the logical flow of how an ad will make a user engage with a brand more so than a competitive brand, so on and so forth. That all helps, right? And obviously the reach aspect of it. So I think those things are really, really important to advertisers when at the end of the day, media is a distribution vehicle. It's not content. So I build content which actually drives consumer behavior because I see it, I like it, or I don't like it. Media is more of a distribution. So what's the most efficient, effective way to me distribute that content to get that consumer to engage? Google works, simple, clear, has a good measurement system, great. Facebook works. So like if you do that, it makes logical sense. You get good measurement. Great, yes, I know it's not, that it is walled, and so you can't see how much, crossover you have between the platforms. But I think logically it makes sense. So that's why I'm saying, like, if we kind of demystify the basics, and then if we're still not satisfied, then let's start adding layers of complexity to be able to answer some of those questions.
So it's ease of use.
Ease of use, yeah.
So are we making it overly complex with blockchain and some of these new models? I mean, do we really even need this? This has been a progression from EDI to eBiz to programmatic to, it's just more technology, right?
So if you look at other technologies that we've inserted into the business, whether it be Hadoop or certain kinds of machine learning, it does make it more complex for a very short period of time. So we try and measure what the long-term result of it's going to be, and is it going to be a net positive for us and our clients. That's what we're trying to look at. And it's not that we want to keep doing all the things that we have been doing. In fact, we don't. That's how we look at this.
I think if you ask a client when they look at the budget and they see that only 4 or 5% of their media spend is actually going on inventory, I think you'll find they've got a real issue. And unfortunately, the industry has, plenty of examples of that. And that's a very good reason for disintermediating the current programmatic pathway and the number of, going to the Loom Escape for a second, that we've just got too much tech in the middle, and we're not clear on what added value it's actually bringing to the piece, especially when so little is actually going on actual inventory. So, I mean, that's a very basic level of where blockchain can be very useful.
I mean, the good news is if they're only getting 4 or 5% of working inventory, they'll go out of business soon, in which case they,
I mean, you know, there are huge implications for the freedom of press and democracy and all of this.
That's another panel discussion. Our
Maybe
favorite.
the next one.
Yeah, okay. So
Joe,
good.
panel, thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
That was really good.